So it's Labor Day weekend, the end of summer. One of my favorite scriptures is from Jeremiah 8:20. The harvest is past, the summer is over, and we are not yet saved. It's a little depressing, I admit. But often at the end of summer, I have this feeling of, and that 30 pounds I was going to lose, and all that exercise I was going to do, and all the other things I'd hoped to accomplish. I haven't quite gotten to it yet. Summer is over, but the autumn awaits us, and full of possibility. This has been a summer of anniversaries and a summer of activity. I like Jim Walker, who's a member of our church, posted on his Facebook. He said, "Dallas people, you're acting like it's the end of the world because summer's over. That's crazy. It's summer for 3 more months here." Sadly, I think that's true. But I was thinking about the events of this summer, the anniversaries of this past week. That's what I meant to say. You know, it was on August 28th, 1963, 51 years ago this week, that 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for the March for Jobs and Freedom, the March on Washington. And that work is still not yet completed. It was on August 28th, 1955, that Emmett Till was killed in Money, Mississippi. That anniversary is this week also. A young African-American young man who lost his life because he was accused of flirting with a white woman. He would have been 71 years old this month, had he been allowed to live, 73. And that anniversary takes place. The events of Ferguson, Missouri have unfolded throughout this summer to remind us that the work of challenging racism is not yet over. It's possible for us to think that the work that we do, whether the work at our jobs, the work in our personal lives, the work for social justice, that somehow it doesn't seem to have an impact or make a difference. I love this Bible quote from the epistles: "Be ye steadfast, immovable, knowing that in God your labor is not in vain." And that's been personally comforting to me too. When I look at sometimes, have I made a difference doing this or that? This sermon and the words of Jesus are for you if you think that your work has been in vain, or if you wonder whether you're making a difference, or if you're impatient for the justice you long for in the world has not yet fully arrived, or even if you are experiencing personal frustration in the job that you have, or if you're looking for work that is meaningful. And work that is meaningful can be the thing that we're compensated for, or it can be the thing that we do when we're not at work that gives meaning to our lives. Be ye steadfast, immovable, knowing that in God your labor is not in vain. These words from Matthew's gospel, like a lot of Matthew's gospel in the lectionary this summer, I have to say, no preacher wants to get up every week and preach doom and gloom, but the Matthew cycle contains some of the more doer phrases of Jesus, not the sort of thing that you hope someone who you invite to dinner will share at the dinner table. And today's lectionary passage is the same. It contains severe words, and yet I also believe they are meant to comfort us, particularly in that notion of the value of how we spend our lives, the value of our labor. It says, it opens, "From that time," Jesus had just been talking with the disciples and with Peter in particular about the role they would play in the unfolding religious movement that they were a part of. It says, he began to explain to the disciples, and here's where you might think from the previous passage, you might say, how we are going to change the world and see the result in our time and generation. But instead he says to them that he must go to Jerusalem, the center of power, religious and political. It would be like saying, I have to go to Washington, D.C. That's what it would sound like to them when he said Jerusalem. And undergo great sufferings at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus is particularly attuned to the consequences of trying to change religion. And though the other Gospels tell the story a little differently, in Matthew's version, Jesus warns people about church people in particular. It's the truth. Elders, chief priests, scribes, these are all religious offices, not political offices. There are other occasions in which he challenges us about the dangers of engaging people in authority, but in particular, he identifies church people. And then he says, and not only that, I will be killed and on the third day raised to life. Well, that's not exactly a pep talk before you go out onto the field. But what he is saying is this: there is a consequence to speaking the truth. And he says, it may even cost me my life, but he also adds, and on the third day I will rise again. And it is so easy for us to hear the harsh words without the assurance also of resurrection. One of my favorite Bible commentaries that I read every time I go to the Bible is called The Gospels of Solantiname by Ernesto Cardenal. He's a Catholic priest who worked in Nicaragua during the revolution there, and he did Bible studies with, they're called campesinos in the book. We would say the word peasants, but that doesn't translate so easily into our English, our American English. So people who don't have property, people who are workers, people who don't have power. He plunked the Bible down in the middle of them and said, don't worry about what the Greek or the Hebrew, what it meant originally. What does it mean to you from your experience? This passage has a beautiful testimony by a woman named Olive, whose daughter was killed in the revolution, and she refuses to dress in mourning because she believes that her daughter's death, while sad and tragic, was not in vain. And she says about this particular Bible verse, yes, it says they will be killed, but also that they will be resurrected. And she keeps making that testimony throughout the conversation that the group has around this Bible passage. And I want us to pay special attention to it. There are consequences to prophetic work or to just speaking up. But there is also a promise of resurrection, of healing, of new life that comes also as a natural consequence of truth-telling. So Peter, whom Jesus had just said in the previous passage, I love your style, who you are. You are the rock on which we're going to build this religious renewal. Who you are, perfect, love it. You're just the kind of person I want. This is just a few verses earlier. But here, in this continuing story, as soon as Jesus finishes speaking, Peter takes him aside and rebukes him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, that this must happen to you. He loves Jesus. He loves what they're doing. And he can't bear the thought that they, in order to be successful, might also have to endure suffering, possibly even the loss of Jesus, whom he loves. And Jesus responds, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Okay, Jesus escalates a little quickly, I think. And I do wish someone had told him in Sabbath school, Jesus, we don't call our friends Satan. But I think it's evidence of the high stakes that they all felt in this. Peter does not want to see Jesus or others suffer. And Jesus says to Peter, don't tempt me. I'm on my game right now. I'm focused. I know we're doing the right thing. Don't fall prey to this temptation to compromise at a critical time in order to avoid what might be suffering. To avoid oppression does not end the oppression, it compounds it. And we become participants even in our own oppression if we acquiesce to it. So Jesus says to Peter in stronger language that I think is necessary, strictly speaking, "Get behind me, Satan." There have been people who have engaged in the work of social change who have received this counsel. And also there have been experiences in our own lives when we are tempted to not see it through for fear that we might lose what we have. Jesus' rebuke to Peter is confirmation for us that though we would use different language today, still we have to resist the temptation to compromise our person or our movement or other people in the hope of short-sighted gains. So who am I thinking of when I say this? I'm thinking of Frederick Douglass, who was a 19th century ex-slave abolitionist, the first man to speak at the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, one of the few men in attendance, African American. He said this about struggles for change: "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are those who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice or wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or action or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." This is Frederick Douglass's version of "Get behind me, Satan." It's his way of saying, no, we are going to have to push this through if we want to see an end to slavery, and if we want to see African American men and women have the right to vote. This is in the 1850s that he's speaking. And if we want to see all women have the right to vote. These were all concerns of his 160 years ago. And that's how he says it. There must be a struggle. It doesn't mean it's not worth it. I know what it is like to struggle in my own personal life with the temptation to think that I just can't do this anymore. And I'll be very personal with you about this in the hopes that it will speak to someone's circumstance. When you live with a chronic illness, as I do with HIV, and I've been doing this for many years now, many years longer than I ever thought I would, and a lot of years longer than they said I would live, it is tempting to, for example, compromise on the discipline of daily medication because I just think I can't do this anymore and I can't live with the side effects of it. Now, this is very short-sighted because if I weren't doing it, I wouldn't be alive. But I'm letting you know that every person, and myself included, struggles at times with not wanting to keep up the fight, even when it's not in our self-interest to give up. I want to call out Denise Lee today because last year on World AIDS Day, she sang the song that she's going to sing today. I didn't know my own strength. Others have sung it, but in the past year, when I have struggled with being adherent on medication, it has been Denise Lee's voice in my head. There are worse things, I will tell you, worse voices you could have in your head. I didn't know my own strength, and I crashed down and tumbled, but I did not crumble. I got through all the pain. I didn't know my own strength. Survived my darkest hour. My faith kept me alive. I picked myself back up, held my head up high. I was not built to break. I didn't know my own strength. This is the prayer we have to summon when we are tempted to give in. I think it's more positive to say this prayer than it is to say, "Get behind me, Satan." Nevertheless, it's powerful to find within yourself whatever it takes to rededicate, to recommit. And our role with each other is not, even out of love, to try to spare each other, but to support each other in the decisions and choices we make to survive. Peter might have helped Jesus more if he had said, I know this is going to be hard, but you can count on me to be there with you. And ultimately, not with his words, he has a checkered history about this, but he shows up. And even when he's not able to all the time, and when there's backsliding, let's just say, still in the end, he shows up, and he's there, and he's present. That's a better human impulse for us to emulate when we're in those situations. Here's how Jesus concludes this little discourse. If anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. These are hard words. What does it mean to lose your life in order to gain it? Some people choose it, some people don't. Some people, like Oscar Romero, who the Vatican just declared they would no longer prevent from the process of becoming a saint. That's kind of the weird negative double talk that religious people do, rather than compliment and say, Oscar Romero, religious hero. They're saying, well, the fact that he was a Marxist doesn't prevent him from also having been a good person. He gave his life so that people, an entire nation, would be saved. Emmett Till, whom I mentioned earlier, whose name we have to bring up every year in church in America, at least, until racism is over. He lost his life at the age of 14. He didn't choose it. His mother decided to make something of it, though, Mamie Till Mobley. I love her autobiography. I was rereading it again this week and remembered that after the trial in which her son's killers were exonerated, she promised to pray. And she started praying, she said, for Rosa Parks. And she believes that her prayer vindicated her son's untimely and unjust death. She says this, we cannot afford the luxury of self-pity. Our top priority now is to get on with the building process. My personal peace has come through helping boys and girls beyond the ordinary and strive for the extraordinary. We must teach our children to weather the hurricanes of life, pick up the pieces and rebuild. We must impress upon our children that when troubles rise to 7.1 on life's Richter scale, they must be anchored so deeply that though they sway, they will not topple. Jesus says this final verse, the human one will come with the angels in the glory of God, and then will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the coming one return. Those are hard words to hear. Though some will die, some will actually live to see the result of the work that we are doing. This week I was at a meeting that we held here with immigration activists from all around North Texas who are trying to organize groups, including churches, to begin visiting families, mothers and children, who are in detention in a facility in Johnson County in Claiborne. It's about 50 miles from here. I bet most of us don't even know that that exists right now, that there are hundreds of women and children in jail awaiting immigration deportation proceedings. And they've been there for several years now. They told us that nursing mothers receive 1 bottle of bottled water per day. Not everyone will live to see their vindication, but some will if we make a difference. Their children will. Right now, there are babies in jail 50 miles from here whose mothers are receiving only a bottle of water per day for nourishment. We have an obligation to make sure that they see what some who are now alive may not live to see. I loved L. Sharpton's eulogy at Michael Brown's funeral this week. And I want to quote from it as we conclude, if I can find it. And here it is. Not everyone likes L. Sharpton. He speaks difficult truths at times. Michael Brown must be remembered for more than disturbances. He must be remembered for this. This is where they started changing what was going on. Oh yeah, there have been other times in history that became seminal moments, and this is one of those moments. And this young man, for whatever reason, has appealed to all of us, and we've got to solve this and not continue this. All of us are required to respond to this, and all of us must solve this. I believe that he is echoing the words of Jesus, who, speaking to people who were afraid that they might not make a difference, urged them to commit and to resolve more fully to work that is real, work that is liberating, personally or socially. Be steadfast, immovable. Know that in God your labor is not in vain. Amen.